Lesson 4 supported reading then, the work of the Royal Army Medical Corps and the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry. The Royal Army Medical Corps. Stretcher bearers. The casualty is likely to have received first medical attention at aid posts situated in or close behind the frontline position. Units in the trenches provided such posts and generally had a medical officer, orderlies, and men trained as stretcher bearers who would provide this support. The field ambulance, see below, would provide relays of stretcher bearers and men skilled in first aid at a series of bearer points along the route of evacuation from the trenches. All involved that were well within the zone and well could be under fire. The field ambulance. This was a mobile medical unit, not a vehicle. Each British division had 3 such units, as well as specialist medical sanitary units. The field ambulances provided the bearer posts, but also established main and advanced, that is, forward dressing stations, where a casualty could receive further treatment and be got into a condition where he could be evacuated to a casualty clearing station. Men who were ill or injured would also be sent to the dressing stations, and in many cases returned to their unit after first aid or some primary care. The dressing station. There was no hard and fast rule regarding the location of a dressing station. Existing buildings and underground dugouts and bunkers were most common, simply because they afforded some protection from enemy shell fire and aerial attack. The dressing stations were generally manned by the field ambulances of the Royal Army Medical Corps. Once treated at a dressing station, casualties could be moved rearward several miles to a casualty clearing station. This might be on foot, on a horse-drawn wagon, or a motor ambulance or lorry, in some cases by a light railway. It is helpful to consult the war diary of the Assistant Director of Medical Services of the division relevant to the man's unit, for they usually have very detailed reports on the locations of the bearer and dressing stations at the time that the man was being evacuated to. Casualty clearing stations. The CCS was the first large, well-equipped and static medical facility that the wounded man would visit. Its role was to retain all serious cases that were unfit for further travel, to treat and return slight cases to their unit, and to evacuate all others to base hospitals. It was often a tented camp, although when possible the accommodation would be in huts. CCSs were often grouped into clusters, 2 or 3 in a small area, usually a few miles behind the lines and on a railway line. A typical casualty clearing station could hold 1,000 casualties at any time, and each would admit 15 to 300 cases in rotation. At peak times of battle, even the casualty clearing stations were overflowing. Serious operations such as limb amputations were carried out there. Some CCSs were specialist units for nervous disorders, skin diseases, infectious diseases, certain types of wounds, etc. Casualty clearing stations did not move location very often, and the transport infrastructure of railways usually dictated their location. Most evacuated casualties came away from set casualty clearing stations by rail, although motor ambulances and canal barges also carried casualties to base hospitals or directly to a port of embarkation if the man had been identified as a Blighty case, that is, to be sent back to Britain. In 1916, 734,000 wounded men were evacuated from casualty clearing stations by train and another 17,000 by barge on the Western Front alone. There were 4 ambulance trains in 1914 and 28 by 1916. The serious nature of many wounds defied the medical facilities and skills of the casualty clearing station, and many positions are today marked by large military cemeteries. The casualty clearing stations also catered for sick men. Generally, considering the conditions, the troops were kept in good health. Great care was taken in reporting sickness and infection, and early preventative measures were taken. The largest percentage of sick men were venereal disease cases at 18.1% per 1,000 casualties. Trenchfoot was next with 12.7. Until mid-1915, the CCS was known as a clearing hospital. Generally, there was one provided for each division. From the CCS, the casualty would be evacuated to a base hospital. Base hospitals. Once admitted to a base hospital, the soldiers stood a reasonable chance of survival. More than half were evacuated from a general or stationary hospital to further treatment or convalescence, rest, in the UK. The stationary hospitals, 2 per division, could hold 400 casualties each. The general hospital could hold over 1,000. They were located near the Army's principal bases at Boulogne, Le Havre, Rouen, Le Touquet, and Etaples. The establishment of a general hospital included 32 medical officers of the RAMC, 3 chaplains, 73 female nurses, 206 Army Medical Corps troops acting as orderlies. The troops were enlarged in 1917 to as many as 2,500. Underground hospital at Arras. A tunnel carved into the chalk led to a British World War I field hospital. It had lain undiscovered and it was abandoned in 1917. A network of caves was built to take in 700 casualties and was just 800 metres from the German front line. The hospital was in service for just 3 days before a German shell hit the roof, so the walls collapsed. Everybody was evacuated safely. The First Aid Nursing Yeomanry. The First Aid Nursing Yeomanry, the FANY, was founded in 1907 by Edward Baker. Those who joined the First Aid Nursing Yeomanry were sent to battlefronts in both World War I and World War II. Baker's idea was that women who joined the FANY would not only be first aid specialists, but also to have skills that would allow them to get to the casualties on the battlefield itself. Therefore, the original members of the FANY were trained in cavalry work, signalling and camping out. By August 1914, Grace Ashley Smith and Lillian Franklin essentially ran the FANY. However, no one at a senior level in the British Army was sympathetic to them. When the World War I was declared, recruits into the FANY went to Belgium where they were welcomed. Here they did sterling work in helping the casualties in the Belgian army. Just 6 weeks into the war, FANY recruits were working at a hospital in Antwerp. Such was their success, they were given a hospital to run. But it did mean that a great deal more members of the FANY had to be sent to Belgium. Ironically, Antwerp fell to the Germans as the first team of FANYs was waiting for a train to take them in London to take them via a boat to Belgium. Ashley Smith made her escape back to Britain, where she set about trying to get transport for the FANYs, as she believed that this was the only way that the unit would be able to improve its function in a war zone. At the end of 1914, 6 FANYs went to France with just £12. In view of the German advance, it was no surprise that when they got to Calais, they found the dock covered up with wounded British soldiers who were receiving only the minimum of care. They set up a hospital in a convent school, and British wounded soldiers were arriving at it before they had time to unpack their equipment. The hospital soon had 100 beds, and between 1914 and 16, the hospital treated over 4,000 patients. As well as treating the soldiers, they drove ambulances and set up soup kitchens and general canteens. A lot of their work put them in touch with the front line and danger. For the duration of the war, they won 17 military medals, 17 Croix de Guerre, war crosses, and 1 Legion d'Honneur. These were both French awards. The RAMC.